Welcome to Hello Grow,
Utah's #1 growth podcast.
I'm Court Brady.
I am Carlos Souza.
And today we have John Richards with us.
Awesome. Good to be here.
Stoked to have you, John. I looked you up on LinkedIn. We already knew each other, but I wanted to get the exact intro for you. And you have 120 experiences. So when you click show more, I expected for it to say, okay, it's only showing 50 experiences. Click to show another 50 experiences. You've had your hands in tons of things that have happened to move Utah forward. So I'm really excited to talk to you, especially in the entrepreneurship. I'm going to highlight a few of those things. You've been part of the BYU entrepreneurship, UVU entrepreneurship and technology for a long time. You've invested with Mercado, Peak, Y Combinator, Kickstart. You're an investor, advisor, or board member at 4Up Golf, Route, Domo, Dev Mountain, VidAngel. And you have your own story, which I want to get into a little bit, of Yellow Pages, taking it digital and selling it to InfoSpace, which were at that time, were they public or did they go public?
No, they were brand new. It was two startups merging together. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we're really amped to have you on.
Okay.
So we're going to talk a lot about entrepreneurship. We first met when I came and took your Startup Ignition course or incubator, whatever you want to call it. And that was about 1.5 years ago. I got a ton of value from it. Before we jump into there, I was wondering if you could just share your story. You've probably shared it dozens of times, but I want to hear your maybe 5 or 10 minute version of going through building your company and then exiting that company. And then we're going to focus a lot on early stage startups, all the do's and don'ts and who you invest in and who you pass on and why.
Okay.
So let's start with, we just want to hear your story. How did you get into entrepreneurship and all the way through to exit?
All right. Sounds good. So as a child, I actually was really entrepreneurial. So I enjoyed running the local neighborhood basketball league and keeping track of the finances and organizing the league more than being on one of the teams, because I put together a basketball league for our neighborhood. I would do things like rent my books in my home to other kids, like a library for a nickel, and stuff like that. I also ran a casino in my basement. I also...
You're from Nevada?
No, from Seattle.
Oh, Seattle.
It's probably highly illegal. And then I also... did football pools at high school. That was the most lucrative childhood entrepreneurial venture. So I would have all the guys in the high school. I'd say, here's 10 NFL games. If you guess the winner of all 10, you put in $1, you win 100. Nobody ever won, because guessing the winner of all 10 was very hard to get 10 out of 10.
Genius.
So funny. And so I did stuff like that. I ran a competitive newspaper to the school newspaper. So even while I was editor of the school newspaper, so stuff like that. But then somewhere I was a very strong math and science student, and I got kind of channeled to medicine and I want to be a doctor. And so I went to college at BYU, moved from Seattle down to Utah to go to college, and I was pre-med. And then I got accepted into medical school, and I went through a number of majors, because I first started at zoology as a major, because that's very common for doctors and dentists at BYU to take that major. But I started realizing I'm not so sure I want to be a doctor about my junior year. And so then I went in and asked, what if I don't go into medical school or dental school, what else can I do with zoology? And they, well, you can be a forest ranger. And that's it. So I said, okay, maybe I need change. What's some other better undergraduates for medical school that give you more options? And then they told me microbiology. I did that for 30 days and hated it. And then I switched to chemistry, which I was strong in high school in physics and chemistry and calculus. But I went to chemistry, and chemistry is a fantastic major because you can do anything with that. But it's also very hard, probably like the second hardest major after PChem, which is physical chemistry, and or chemical engineering, I should say, is the name of the major. Chemical engineering is really hard too. And so it was hard. And when I got into the fourth year, I finally hit math I didn't understand, which was interesting to me. And then also in my senior year, I realized I'm not so sure I like medicine. So the BYU had a great program. They had you shadow a doctor. And I shadowed a doctor and went and watched a surgery. I found out I didn't like blood. in the sight of blood when the scalpel went in and blood came out. It was really interesting. Also, shadowing them for lifestyle. Like I went and saw doctors and their wives were mowing the lawn and doing all the work and not seeing their husbands very much. And then I started saying, I'm not sure if I want this lifestyle. So I got accepted in medical school, but didn't attend. And instead, I went back to my city, my home city of Seattle, and got involved in the Yellow Pages industry, publishing. And it was a printing and publishing. And I found out soon that publishing, there was more money in. And Yellow Pages was a very lucrative place to be because I graduated in 1985. In 1984, the federal government in the United States broke up the biggest corporation in the world, the most powerful corporation in the world, called American Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T. It's not today's AT&T. This is the company Alexander Graham Bell started. And it was, 4 million employees, monolithic corporation. And the federal government said, you're a monopoly, and broke it into 8 separate companies. And one of their major businesses, as a matter of fact, their most profitable dollar for dollar, was printing and publishing Yellow Pages. Because before the days of the internet and Google, the way you looked up a person or a business to find information out about them was in the Yellow and White Pages. And so it was a very, very big and lucrative industry, very profitable. But when they broke up AT&T, right as I was graduating from college, it became very easy to compete against them because it's an unregulated industry, unlike local dial tone and long distance and manufacturing telephone equipment. It was, and telecommunications things, this was unregulated. Anybody could do it. So we got in and did Yellow Pages, and it was very lucrative. The competitive or independent Yellow Pages industry, from my graduation year of 85 through 95, the next 10 years was like boom time. So I rode that wave and went from one publication to 44 different directories in this Seattle and Portland areas, competing against US West, one of the baby bells that had come off of AT&T. And so very successful, became very well known in the industry, very technologically advanced. I was a young guy, and in chemistry, I learned how to program in Pascal language and advanced basic. And so kind of technologically, so I started adopting Aldus PageMaker, the very first page creation software. It'd be like Adobe Illustrator today, right? Or things like that. And to make the ads, and then starting to use computers, because when I entered the industry, you were still setting type to put a phone book together. There wasn't digital typesetting as much. And I started doing all that. I started doing color instead of just black ink on yellow. So I was very innovative. And for 10 years, we just boomed. It was an incredible time. And I also, kind of brought to the industry, instead of calling it Yellow Pages, we renamed ourselves Banana Pages. And people go, how's it crazy is that? We grew 500% in 3 years after making that branding change, because Yellow Pages was boring and was the phone company. We were an innovative publisher, right? So that's what we did. That went for 10 years, just crazy good times. And then what happened was in 1994, and by the way, in that 10 years, I should say, I cut my teeth I started not knowing how to manage or do much, and just learned by doing. And, and as CEO, got up to about 80, 90 employees publishing phone books in Seattle and Portland area. And then,
can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
You were the CEO.
Yeah, I did. There were other people involved. I didn't start as a CEO, but I became the pusher, the maverick, the one that kind of was really pushing stuff. Yeah.
Did you have more of a disposition to doing the technology side,
yes,
or doing the sales side, or finding the who to do the what?
I quickly learned that the money's on the sales side, and that's where you generate revenue, which creates entity value, or the value of the shares of stock or equity in your company, and also just you had to have sales and revenue. So I did switch. You nailed it. I went from being more the technology thinker to being on the sales and business side, and then I switched to there. And I still, I'm pretty technologically savvy for a non-techie person today, but at the same time, I did switch over to the business side. That's a great question.
Did you have a natural proclivity to sales? A lot of the tech people I know want to be heads down coding and don't necessarily want to be customer
I don't
facing.
think I have a natural proclivity. I am a good salesperson if I truly, truly believe in it. If I don't believe in it or have doubts, I'm the worst salesperson. So I'm not good at covering up my doubts and still selling something I don't believe in. I'm not good at that. And maybe nobody should be, but at the same time, I'm very bad at it. So, but when I'm good at it, I think it's just my passion and the fact that I'll roll up my sleeves and work harder than anybody to get it done type of attitude. So that 10, 12 years was really successful. And then towards the end of that 10-year period, in 1994, a guy in all black with a black turtleneck comes into my office and tells me, you're going to be out of business in 2 years. And I go, what are you talking about? The whole Yellow Page industry is going to be out of business in 2 years. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, have you heard of the internet? And I go, that thing that scientists and universities and academics use to exchange information? I think I've heard of that. He goes, no, it's gone commercial. There's people that put ads out on email, and which was like early days of spam, but and they're making money because they're putting out emails and getting business. And also there's talk that it's going to be a graphical interface. And I go, really? And so I started listening to him. And so then in late 94.
Was that Steve Jobs, by the way, in the black
I wanted to ask that question.
That's it wasn't Steve Jobs, but it was a guy doing this. And so I spent the last half of 1994 putting together the first ever internet Yellow Pages derived from an actual Yellow Page company. And so I went on there and launched at a Bill Gates trade show in Seattle, Washington, at the Westin Hotel, which is a famous hotel in Seattle. And I put it into, I got a booth and said, hey, I'm doing internet Yellow Pages. And people went crazy for it and said, what the heck, what's going on? And then I said, man, maybe there's a real business, because I kind of did it as an experiment. And then we took it offline after that and spent until September and in earnest launched the first ever internet Yellow Pages. And that was in September 95. And I got a lot of attention. And so the next 6 months, 10 major companies wined and dined us, wanted to see what we're doing and how we were doing it, what our thoughts were, including Microsoft, for the Baby Bells and others. And like Microsoft is who I spent the most time with. I spent about 9 months with Microsoft, and they were really asking me questions. At one time they said, what would you do with $1 billion in the Yellow Pages industry? And I think audibly in the room, you could hear me gulp, because nobody ever asked me anything like that before. And also I wore a tie 6 days a week, business person with a tie, including on Sundays, right? Wearing a tie. And like several meetings into it, Microsoft goes, if you wear a tie to the next meeting, we're going to cut it off. That's how and then a guy skateboard down the hall, right? It's just a different environment than I was used to. And so then what happened was interesting. In the midst of those talks like that, I got contacted by 3 guys that had just left Microsoft to form a White Pages, but they were getting reports before they left about their talks with me about Yellow Pages, because White Pages was the people. Yellow Pages, the business and advertising where the money's made. And so what happened was they called me up and said, don't, Microsoft's just sucking your brain. They'll never do anything with you. Come join us. And we were going to do White Pages, but we've learned that Yellow Pages is where we should focus. And so what happened was those 3 and I merged together. So my startup with their even younger startup merged together. And they had called their company InfoSpace. And so there were, like 4 of us kind of founders, and then maybe less than 10 people because they had just gotten started, and they talked me into doing it for all stock. So no cash. We just got stock in InfoSpace to merge ours into it. That ended up being a very good move. 2.5 years later, we were at about 1,500 employees and public on the NASDAQ in December of 98. It was crazy wild ride, just insane. And so that was a really fun experience. And that that, I had learned so much during those 10 years at a small business, but then that ride in 2.5 years to that also taught me another side of the world. And I understand more about value creation and public markets and a lot of different things that you can do, and accelerated growth in the technology. And the dawn of the internet age was incredible. The day Netscape went public changed the world. And so Netscape introduced, that was, Mark Andreessen, who you all know now is with Andreessen Horowitz. But Mark Andreessen to me is a college student who invented the first graphical browser called Mosaic at the University of Illinois. And then two Silicon Valley guys got a hold of him and said, let's rename it Navigator and name the company Netscape, and let's go public. And that was the birth of the internet era. And that just is a lot of also what thrusted my efforts ahead and just rode that wave. It was really fascinating. And it was crazy. I mean, really crazy. The valuation went skyrocket way higher than it deserved. And and then the dot-com crash was March of 2000. I sold a good chunk of my holdings in February 2000, not all of it, just a chunk of it, and then promptly was stupid and rode the rest down. But I had enough to really have a lot of comfort in life and what I could do. And so lo and behold, I ended up quote unquote retiring. And that's a dumb thing to say when you're like 38 years old. But then my alma mater, BYU, is what called me up and said, hey, if you're not going to do anything, how would you like to be a professor of entrepreneurship and teach? And I go, I don't have a PhD. And they go, you don't need a PhD. I said, I don't know if I want to do that. And they go, why don't you fly down Tuesday morning, teach a class, and then fly back Tuesday night for a semester, see if you like it. They knew they'd hook me on that. I did that for a semester, ended up liking it, moved my family down here. I had started angel investing in just after my first liquidity was when I missed one part. The print Yellow Page company I sold in 96 as I went to the internet. So at the height of the value of print publishing, right before the internet was going to make an impact on it, I sold the company and did pretty well there, but nothing like the public company. But then I went all in on the internet from the print. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So recently, this is probably 2 years ago, NFTs were just this huge deal, right? Everyone was hyping them up. We're going to go and digitize Michael Jordan's house and then sell the digital images and real estate of this. Back around your time when you're doing this, pets.com is blowing up. All these things are blowing up. You're saying you're getting all this traction, all of this intrigue of, you're going to take the Yellow Pages to the internet. Where do you draw the line between innovative and insane? And how do you know which boat to jump on?
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, if you've ever seen that.
Tell us.
The Gartner hype cycle, Gartner is one of the leading consulting groups in the world. And they came up a few decades ago with the hype cycle and said all technology goes through the hype cycle. And what that means is there's a technological disruption, and then it shoots up to a peak of inflated expectations to where society and the business world and all that think it's going to do way more than it will truly ever do. And valuations skyrocket, investment is massive. And then unfortunately, it then slips into what we call a trough of disillusionment. So a peak of inflated expectations drops down into a trough of disillusionment when they realize it's not as cool as everybody thought it would be. It won't change the world quite as much as everybody thought. Now, the internet was big and was going to change the world. The mistake was they thought it would happen that fast. That Yellow Page we wiped in 2 years. It actually took about 10 years. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's the difference. And so that's a lot what happens. And then after the trough of disillusionment, according to the Gartner hype cycle, is you come out of the trough of disillusionment into the slope of enlightenment. And then you figure out how to truly use these technologies and change the world and how they make a permanent change to business and society. And that trough, that slope of enlightenment is where you get the next really big, monolithic, entrenched, really change the world companies. So take the internet. The internet went like this and then crashed. And what came out of that was Google, Amazon, Apple, right? They came out into that slope of enlightenment and became the most powerful companies in the world.
So if you wait until the slope of enlightenment to invest, how do you still get early enough in the curve where you're going to be able to reap the lion's share of the reward?
Yeah, well, you can. The peak of inflated expectations, if you get an early exit, like going public in 2.5 years, you can still get that huge hit, right?
Very smooth.
But you're right. At the coming into the slope of alignment, it's still there. The curve goes like this, and then deep, and then it does go up like this.
You're gonna have to
and
describe that with words.
For instance,
for all
if you
the
go back and invest in Microsoft in 1986, by the year 2000, you would have made massive money. Apple, if you would have invested in Apple in 2003, in the next 15 years, you would have made massive money without working, right? I mean, it's just crazy. And that's the slope of enlightenment, because they figure out how to make things work. And so Apple transformed itself from a computer company to an actual consumer electronics company with the most successful electronics product in history, the iPhone smartphone, right? So
sounds like it's what's happening with EVs, right? The hype of excitement, and then now everyone's kind of, it's
is
not
it really as good? But
then we're
they
going to
will.
get to that point.
Same thing. But then one of the big things, if you listen to the All In podcast, not to promote another podcast, because I'm sure that Hello Bro is the number one podcast. All In's number 2. Okay? But the All In podcast, they're just in the recent episodes talked about still driverless, cars are going to be world changing. It's just going to take longer than you think. And most technologies do take longer through that hype cycle. For instance, fax machines were actually scanning and digitizing things believe it or not, in the 30s and 40s. But it wasn't until 1987 that every business had a fax machine. Okay. But right now the cycles are probably getting shorter, because then fax machines got eclipsed by email.
Yeah.
Right? About 8 to 10, 15 years later, right? Still old-fashioned businesses running with fax machines a little bit, but they're basically gone mostly. And so, but again, that 87 till now, let's say even 2010, so that's still a good 20 years it took for fax machines to get eviscerated by email. So that can take time. Does that all make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and just finishing that story back to me, in the late 90s, I dabbled in angel investing. I did the classical thing. The first year made massive mistakes, didn't spend enough time on due diligence, put too much into too few companies. And I corrected that later and learned from those mistakes. And the 2000s, I moved down to Utah to take the position at BYU. And I also got very active. I became managing partner of Utah Angels, the only angel group in the state. And we deployed a lot of capital as Utah Angels and got into deals. I was an early investor in Omniture, which is now, of course, Adobe here in Utah, and stuff like that. And I've done, I don't know, somewhere between 100, 120 angel investments myself. And had, it's really interesting when you do really early stage investing like that. You have one winner, and it can make up for a lot of mistakes, but you've got to do enough deals so you hit that winner. If you do too few deals, you'll get burned and lose a lot of money, because you have to go broadly enough so that you have a chance to hit one of the big winners.
Have you totaled up your total returns from all your angel investing?
So like the 2010s was good, and probably had about a 35% IRR, but the 2010, that's the 2000s, I should say, the 2000s. The 2010s were better because of the advent of lean startup. It turns out that as an angel investor, so I was teaching BYU for the 2000s. I left there in 2013, but 2010, Eric Ries, you've got the book over there. He was a student of Steve Blank. Steve Blank in 2007 to 2009 kind of introduced lean startup to the world. Eric Ries was one of his students, wrote that book. Then Steve Blank later came out with a better book, in my opinion. And then in 2010, I kind of led the effort to throw out the old curriculum at BYU and replace it with lean startup. But lean startup is a fantastic codified system for coming out with a startup as an entrepreneur. But it turns out that it's also an incredible system for an angel investor to do due diligence on a pre-seed or early stage seed company and know whether they should invest or not. Have they really validated their business model? Have they really found product market fit scientifically? So in the 2010s, I started employing lean startup as an investor, and I did fewer deals in the 2010s, but way more success. So part of, and right now I run a venture fund based on this thesis, but I don't do any investing at the peaks of the cycles. So like 2020 and 2021 were incredible inflated peaks, and the valuations were out of this world. I made no investments during those years. But I had 7 harvests, 7 companies sold. And those are companies I had invested in 2010 to 2012, 2013, 2014 during the down years of the Great Recession. So it's the way it's like every other asset class in the venture world. You invest in the trough of the cycle, ride up, and then sell at the peak. It's not a magic science or anything. It's just buy low, sell high, like you should do in every asset class. But in 2020 and 2021, so many I'm talking the biggest investment firms in the world, deployed so much capital, and they're sitting today on those investments down 80, 90% because they invested at the peak. And then 2022 and 2023 went down. So the reason we started a venture fund recently in 2022 was because it went down. And instead of just being angel investors, my son Tyler, who's an entrepreneur in his own right, said, let's do a venture fund this time, not just be 2 angel investors. And that's why we launched a venture fund. That's my life history now. You've heard it all. And one of the things I did in between there in the 2010s too is I also did Startup Ignition boot camp, which you've attended.
Yeah.
And that Startup Ignition boot camp is I left BYU to go to Google for 2 years. That's a weird anomaly in my career. At the age of 50, the Provo mayor, who's a congressman going to be senator, John Curtis, was mayor of Provo and said, I had to repossess the fiber network we spent $40 million on building in Provo, and the person who bought it from us is defaulting, so we got to take it back. Should I just shut it down? And what do you think, John? And he said, I need to get some people together and figure this out. I said, don't shut it down. You spent $40 million. You still owe $10 million on the bond you did. And I said, and it's a fiber network, a dedicated to the home fiber network. It's really incredible. And at the very least, you're going to have to pay the payments anyway. Give it to free to the citizens or something. He goes, what do you mean? What do you do? So I researched it, and then I found Google Fiber, and I saw Google Fiber had launched in Kansas City. And I said, Mayor Curtis, what you should do is you should go to Google Fiber and tell them you want to be their second city. They won't have to build a new network. They'll just take over your network and put their brand on it. And lo and behold, that's what happened. Wow. And then they turned around and said, John, we didn't have any manager or leader in Kansas City. We ran it all out of Mountain View. We want you to be the manager in Provo, in Utah, because we have no presence in Utah. And I go, what are you talking about? I'm a startup guy and haven't really been in an operating company for a lot of years. And they go, no, we want you to do it. And the mayor, and they interviewed me 11 times. I don't know if they interviewed anybody else, but they interviewed me 11 times. And they talked me. I said, I'll do it for a year. They said, no, you got to do it for 2 years. And Provo killed it. The first year we took like huge market share away from Comcast.
Is it profitable?
Yeah. The internet, the ISP business is wildly profitable. The TV and telephone piece of if you do like Comcast and all those, they'll do TV, and ISP, and phone. TV's a mess. That's my opinion. But ISP, the utilization of the bandwidth is so low on average, and you're charging for a fiber connection. If you think of that pipe 24/7 a day, how much does an average family really use the pipe?
A couple hours.
Think about it, right?
Yeah.
It's actually quite profitable. ISP is a good business, but the TV is not. Anyway, that's my opinion. But anyway, so I did that for 2 years. And then after that, I launched Startup Ignition, the boot camp that you took. And it's been going for 9 years, over 600 ventures. I've been through it. And it fills my need and my desire to be a teacher. I like to teach. So.
And you're phenomenal at it, and we're grateful to have you on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm talking too much.
No, I can sit here for another hour and just keep on teaching us.
But anyway, that's kind of the sketch of what's brought me to right now. Yeah.
I'm really curious, and I want to dive deep into this for people that are in the startup or thinking about starting a startup, what the difference between a startup and a company is. If we could start there.
Okay.
And then I just want to get deep into problems that they have and what things that they could do to make themselves more successful, increase their likelihood of success. But let's just start off. What's the difference between a startup and a company?
And I'll even go back up from there a little bit. So the only word we have for a startup really is a startup. Whether it's going to be a small business or a scalable venture, they look the same at the beginning. 1, 2, 3, 4 people starting a business together. But the intent of the founders is a big impact, a big determinant of whether you would call it a small business or a scalable venture. So I make a distinction between a small business and a scalable venture. A small business is usually a business that over time will provide a living to the founders and eventually accumulate some savings and wealth and pay themselves a good salary. They're going to be very, very critical to the business, and their skills and talents, sometimes even certified skills and talents, like in the case of a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, CPA, they're really connect to the being of that company. If they were to leave, they lose clients, or the company doesn't have the skill set. That's a small business. A scalable venture is where the founders intend to actually very quickly create wealth in the enterprise. In other words, the share value or the asset value of the company will have value independent of the person, the founder. Matter of fact, the founder generally wants as quickly as possible in a scalable venture to become not required or needed at the company. That's where some people get really confused. They think they need to do a scalable venture and be so important to the company that they're indispensable. But that's actually what a small business is. A scalable venture is an asset that you can build and create and sell to somebody else, and you can go on your way and do different things. But the money you get from selling the creation you made, and that you're not that important to the future of the company. That's kind of a scalable venture. Now, obviously, if there's a cult of personality created around it, like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, that helps a scalable venture if they're going to stay in it for 20 plus years and build up like that. Does that make sense?
It does.
But now getting to your question, setting that up. So how do you go from a startup, and whether it's a small business or scale up, and how do you tell the difference between that startup phase and the company phase? And that's important to understand, because this is the number one reason why there's failure in entrepreneurship, is that most people think on day one that they're a company, and they think that they can do scaling activity like rent a lot of office space, start hiring employees, designing a logo, and how much important it is to choose the colors of their logo, and how important it is to make a prototype of their vision of a product, when they really haven't even gone to their target market and asked whether their product or service is even needed, how much they'll pay for it, and if there's what we call product market fit. Right. And so what happens is the first phase of a startup is actually called the search phase. And using lean startup, dogma, the search phase is where you're searching in your product. The search phase of a startup, the product is not the widget that it's actually someday going to be selling to customers. The product is a validated business model, proving you have product market fit. So the search phase is all about finding a validated business model and proving scientifically you've got product market fit. That's its goal, that you can make a widget company that has a winning business model. Once the search phase is done and you found the winning business model, now it's time to create a company and start scaling a company. And then it's just a question of execution and whether the founders are good enough managers to execute the now proven business model. But what happens most of the time, and I'm going to say 90 out of 100 times, is entrepreneurs are not well trained in that, or they give token. They may have heard of the words lean startup, but they give token efforts to following lean startup practices, and they go right in and start prematurely scaling. What that means is doing the right thing too early in the life of a company. Like, for instance, I haven't talked to one customer and I go rent office space. Why? Okay. I haven't talked to a customer and I go hire a graphics person that I make my CMO because they can do Adobe Illustrator, and they start making marketing collateral for me. That's all premature activity. It's activity you're someday going to do, but if you do it too prematurely, it sucks up your time and your capital, and you will ultimately fail because you won't get to a product that is a must-have in the minds of your target customer. Anyway, and this is not anything that's my own thinking. This is coming out of the, just the agile movement converted to business, which is what we call lean startup. And when I first learned of lean startup, I back tested my entire career, and it completely explained my successes and failures. And going forward, since I've learned a lean startup, it's helped me avoid failures and be more successful. But even me, with all the training and knowledge I have in this, sometimes I've gotten caught where I go, I'm a special snowflake. I'm so smart, know this so well, I can break a cardinal rule and still make it. Nope, doesn't work. If you break one of the cardinal rules, you will fail. And even, sometimes we think, okay, I'm doing 8 out of 10 things right, I'm going to be able to make it. But the 2 things I'm doing wrong are like absolutely critical. So anyway.
Can we go through those? Also, we're not going to go through all 10, but in that search phase, what are the cardinal rules that are most often broken in the search phase?
Again, not going and validating. So for instance, there's a really good book called The Mom Test. I can't remember right now the author's name, but The Mom Test has come out. It's so good. And it's basically, if you take the Procter & Gamble MBA version of how to come out with new products, here's how it works in a big corporation. You have an idea for a new product. You go to the people in charge and say, with a 30 to 50 page business plan that you've put together from secondary research and a library of information, and put together this plan, say, this is what's going to happen. Now give me money to go make it happen. And they get the money if the decision makers like it, and then they start building the product and spend a ton of money. And then they start saying, okay, what's the marketing channels? How are we going to advertise and market this and create a brand and all this? Oh, we better show it to some customers. And that's why you get the crickets chirping. And we've all been part of when a product gets launched and nobody wants it. Not enough people buy it. That's the problem. And so that happens. And that's why when you're taking big company tactics and strategies and applying them to a startup, a big company is a different organism, has different DNA than a startup. A startup has to do things very differently, and the whole management style is applied. And I even read about that more myself today, about the difference between, it's kind of like founder management versus manager management. A manager at a big company is very different than a founder at a startup. And so some of the biggest sins to commit then are the premature scaling, where the very first one people run into is they start doing stuff like they're a real company and they haven't even talked to one customer. The very first thing you should do when you have an idea and you feel it's a solid idea is you say, who's the target customer? And you start talking to the target customer.
Can you walk us through that conversation? Because that's probably different than a sales conversation where you have an SDR identified, put them through a sequence.
Exactly.
Walk us through the search conversation with the potential.
That process cannot be done by proxy. For instance, it's a founder's job. You cannot hire a VP of sales to go do your lean startup validation work. Only a founder can pivot minute by minute. And you're going to have to pivot. Your first idea out of the chute for a business is not going to be 100% right. You're going to have a lot of errors and a lot of things that need to be corrected. And so only a founder, when they go to, let's say a founder sets up 20 interviews with target customers, by the third customer, they may realize so strongly that they're so wrong on one major piece of what they're doing that they're going to pivot right then and there. When they go to the fourth person, they've now changed their whole business model based on that. And then by the time they get through the 20, they're now pivoted probably several times, at least micro pivots, and they're arriving at a business model that's now been vetted from the brains of who needs to buy it, their customers. And the Mom Test is all about how entrepreneurs come up with an idea. They talk to trusted friends and people, and people tell, oh, you're a genius. You're so smart. When you get that launched, I might even invest in that. It's so good. They haven't talked to a single customer. and that happens a lot. In Utah, when I first got to Utah in 2002, I could not believe how many people had raised like $300,000 to $500,000, burned through it all, and had no business model.
Okay, so when you invest, are you investing in the search stage or post-search stage?
Probably the tail end of the search phase.
Got it. They have some validation.
Yeah, where let's say they're
customers.
80% validated. Yeah, that'd be the number I'd look at.
Okay.
Yeah, because they don't need money. It doesn't cost money to validate. It costs time, and you can do it really rapidly if you're committed to it. The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, but the Startup Owner's Manual by Steve Blank is literally a encyclopedic step-by-step how-to manual of how to do it. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question about founders for you.
Can I answer a little bit more though?
Please.
I'm sorry to come back, but you said what's the first one is rushing into setting up an office, hiring employees, inviting your college roommate to be your chief marketing officer, that kind of stuff. And then you haven't even talked to a customer. So that's the mom test problem and the problem is we all suffer confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is this: when you take your idea, and in the entrepreneurial realm, it's this: you take your idea to people, and let's say even just trusted friends, 10 of those friends tell you you're a genius and so smart. That goes right through your skull, deep into your brain. You go, oh yeah. But the other 10 actually said, I don't know if that will work. And it hits your skull and bounces off, never goes into your brain, and you just think he's an idiot. It happens all the time. And that's very dangerous. The best thing that could ever happen in your validation interviews with target customers is they start saying what they don't like and what you need to change. That's really valuable. And so that's the big first one. Then the other ones people make are just like going in and doing product development before business model development. Product development means, all I want to do is build my product and then after I build my product, the only thing I have to worry about is where I'm going to store all the money I'm going to make. That's kind of how they're thinking. But they build a product that they haven't validated with customers. Nobody buys it. And they go, why didn't this work? And that is so not talking to customers and then going right into product development, which is very expensive. So coding a software platform is expensive. Making molds for tangible products and getting your first production run is expensive. And if you have no clue whether your business model is actually going to create, capture, and deliver value in the marketplace, you're kind of operating on assumptions and not facts. And making huge life decisions and spending big amounts of money on assumptions is very expensive. Anyway, back to your question.
Can I just ask one follow-up question on that? John, let's say that you schedule a couple of those validation calls, those validation meetings. What should those look like? Because we've had people on the podcast that have said, yeah, I had 5 validation calls, 10, and all of those said, I'd give you money if you had this ready. And then when they had it ready, no one gave them money. So what should those validation calls look like?
That is such a great, I tell that in my boot camp. I have a story like that. Now I want to hear your exact story. You tell it because this is really good. That happens all the time. And it's because they did very token and poor validation. Lean startup is actually very simple to talk about, but very hard to do because 100 years of entrepreneurial society in the United States says, just do it like Procter & Gamble. Have an idea, gather resources, build the product, then launch to customers. The only difference Lean Startup's doing in that equation is saying, no, take the customers and put them first in that process and go talk to customers. But it has to be statistically reliable. So this is my biggest problem for people that come into my boot camp and go down this process is they stop at just about 5. So the law of statistics says you can't extrapolate to a higher population unless you do at least 20. So 20 is a minimum number of interviews. And this is just out of the science of statistics, right? And the law of statistics, if you want to extrapolate to higher populations. So when I sit down and mentor with entrepreneurs, we decide let's say they're a 2-sided market where they're going to talk to businesses who are paying them, but the product also requires consumers to use it for free, but it's not free because they're paying with time, attention, right? And data. Like Facebook is a 2-sided market. Advertisers pay them money, but users pay them with time, attention, and data to use this incredible software platform, Facebook. And so when you go to validate, you need to validate both. And the question is how many of each? So a huge idea like Facebook would need a lot of validation, probably about 40 to 80 interviews of businesses and about 200 to 400 interviews of consumers, because it's going to be not just adults in the US, but including 12 and over. I mean, this is a massive population. And if you just go ask 5 people, who's not to say that you just didn't run into some crazy weirdos in your 5 interviews that are some weird vein that are completely off base. So as you hone in with more numbers in the, N equals whatever number you need, you'll start like a scientist you wouldn't want a vaccine developed and given to you
Tested on 5 people.
based on 5 people. I heard a rumor, by the way, I don't want to spread things, but like the 5th or 8th, whatever follow-up to the COVID vaccines was done with 1 mouse test on 5 mice before they released it to the humans. I don't know if that's true, but that would be, if that were true, that would be terrible science, right? And you would say, what's going on here? And same thing for a business. 5 interviews with friendly people that know who you are. Like a validation interview from anybody that has a prior relationship with you is completely invalid scientifically, right?
Yes.
Do you know? I'm going to tell you a story. One time, an entrepreneur asked me to set them up with a really significant investor, and I did it. And they went to lunch, and the entrepreneur comes back and goes, "Oh, that was the greatest meeting. I think I'm going to get money in 30 days. It was so good." And then I called up the investor, and I know the investor's kind of tougher than that. And I called the investor and I go, "Hey, the entrepreneur just told me you had the lunch. So thanks for going to that lunch. And he said you loved it and you're going to be investing in the next 30 days. And he goes, "Oh, I hated it." I go, "You hated it?" He goes, "Oh yeah, stupidest idea I ever heard." I go, "What?" That entrepreneur left feeling that you liked it and that you'd probably be investing in the next 30 days. I don't know where that idea came from. But John, you got to understand, I'm not in the business of discouraging entrepreneurs. He's got to go find out for himself how bad that idea is. And then I say back to the investor, we are the feedback loop. Investors are one of the feedback loops for entrepreneurs. If you don't like it, you need to tell them. So I'm kind of known as being really blunt, and some people in Utah don't like me because there's a lot of passive aggressiveness in Utah. And I'm super straightforward. And you saw that in the boot camp, I'm sure. And that's just how I am because I care about the person. If like right now, I know a TA for me at BYU that's now a multimillionaire because when he came to me with this first idea. Oh, by the way, I want to finish what I said about, I told that investor also, so you're not in the business of discouraging entrepreneurs, but are you in the business of misleading the entrepreneur into spending his next 2 years of his life and his life savings on a terrible idea? Is that what you're in the business of? They don't like when I say that either. So, but back to this story, this one time at a TA, I was starting a new entrepreneurship class and I was looking for a TA and looking for students. And I brought the Lamborghini and Ferrari that John Pastana, the founder of Omniture, has to the middle of the BYU campus and put them in the middle of campus. I got the landscaper to drop some posts because you can't ask for permission to do these things or they'll all say no. They dropped some posts. I drove them in the middle of the red square out in front of the Wilkinson Center. And I put up a sign that said, "If you want one of these, take this class." And, and so,
greatest advertising.
So 295 people signed up for the class, which is a lot for a first-time class and elective class, right? And so that happened. One of the persons that stopped by when I was out there signing people up is he came and said, "Oh, what do you help students with their business ideas?" And I go, "Yeah, that's what we do. We mentor and help them." And he goes, "Well, I got a great idea I'd love to tell you about." And I go, "Okay, well, make an appointment. Come by my office and let's talk about it." And he comes to my office and he tells me, and by the way, I also have a system very good at hearing ideas and instantly being able to give feedback. But he tells me the idea. And I looked at him sitting across from my desk. I said, "That is probably the single worst idea I've heard in my entire time so far at BYU." and he went like that. His face went white. And he goes, "What do you mean? Everybody's told me how great of an idea it is." I go, "Who are the people telling you that?" And he goes, my roommate, my mother, my uncle, my mission president, my companion that I went on my mission with. I go, none of that qualifies. Okay. You need to go out and talk to the target market people. I want you to go out and just ask the people that you expect are going to buy this and what they think of it. And you're going to find out. And I'm not just going to say it's a bad idea. Here's the 5 reasons I went through. 5 reasons why that's a terrible idea. And he said, okay, I'm going to go do that. And I'll be back in 3 days. But they never come back in 3 days when I do this. It took him about 2 or 3 weeks. And he comes back and he comes in and he goes, you're right. I did it. My idea sucks. It really sucks. How did I not know that? I go, well, because you were asking the wrong people in the wrong way. And he goes, I need to hang around you more. How can I hang around you more? I mean, what do you mean? And he goes, I just want to hang around you. Okay. And I go, well, funny, that new class, I'm looking for a TA for it. And he goes, I'll do it for free. I go, no, I have to pay you. They make me pay you. I have to pay you to be the TA. And he became TA. He hung around me. And after that semester, he did a great job and he learned a lot by listening to the class and everything. After the semester was over, I was doing my next summer cohort I was the founder of Boom Startup, which is a tech accelerator like Y Combinator and here in Utah and, Techstars and all that. And my son was graduating that same year, Tyler, and he was going to be my program manager, meaning sitting every day in with all the companies. And this guy goes, okay, the semester's over. I'll work for free for Tyler and be his assistant program manager. And I go, I can do that. You can work for free in the summer program. And he did that. During that summer, he and Tyler recognized that there's a huge need for training more junior developers. And there have been 1 or 2 in the country started up a coding boot camp to learn how to be a software engineer. And they founded Dev Mountain. And so Dev Mountain, and 4 years later, they had a massive exit selling to a multi-billion-dollar company. And that guy's had the kind of good life ever since. So there you go.
What a great story.
And that's true. And I have a lot of stories like that. But that's the funny thing but it goes back to this radical honesty is really important in the venture ecosystem. And it's, I think, inherent on investors. But a lot of people have told me, you can't do a venture fund and be telling people bluntly that you don't like their ideas and stuff. But I do. And I said, that's just not me. I'm going to do it. And it doesn't make me popular with some people, but at the same time, they said that you'll get a reputation of shooting down dreams. No. And I've shot down a lot of dreams, and 9 to 12 months later, here in Utah, people come back and say, everything you said was going to happen happened. I need now to follow your advice, and exactly what should I do on my next company, because that one failed because I didn't listen to you. And again, it's not about 10% of what I teach and share is things that are my own development. I'm just helping people do the really smart, good things in launching a startup.
I have a question. We're about at time.
Okay.
So
it went fast.
This is amazing. And like Carlos said,
I didn't give you enough questions.
If you weren't going to the Caribbean, we'd be here all night asking you questions, and it would be a PhD masterclass for us in startup. This has been amazing. I'm doing a new startup and written so many notes, even after taking Startup Ignition. It's like, oh yeah.
You can do a refresher for really cheap.
Yeah,
the tuition for a refresher is nothing.
Consider me signed up.
The next one's October 2nd through 4th. If anybody's interested.
October 2nd through 4th.
We have people from other states come in and stuff. And again, I don't make money. I charge a tuition so people take it seriously.
Yeah.
They found, just like Dev Mountain, the boot camp, if the person doesn't pay their own tuition or pay a tuition, they don't actually do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, what's your question?
So when you're investing in a startup, they're 80% past the search phase. What is the thing that you index on most? Is it the idea, the industry, the timing, the partnership, capitalization?
Kind of all the above. We have a 4-page, and happy to share it with anybody that wants to see it. It's a 4-page due diligence checklist.
Can we put it as a PDF on this podcast?
Sure. Yeah.
That'd be amazing. Okay, it'll be in the link.
Yeah. Okay, you follow up on that. But literally, it's what I've gathered over the years of what's important to me, and it's pretty comprehensive. And what it is some people also, there's investors around there say, pre-seed, pre-revenue companies, you can't do due diligence on. It's just a contribution to society and and all that. I said, no, what are you talking about? Lean Startup gives us all the tools to do due diligence on pre-seed companies, and also pre-seed of all the stages. You have pre-seed, early stage seed, mid-stage seed, late stage seed, series A, B, C, D. PitchBook last November came out with a massive report saying that pre-seed is by far the most lucrative stage to invest at, but you have to do it right. For instance, if I had $500,000 and wanted to invest in pre-seed companies. I take $250,000, put $25,000 each into 10 different companies over the next year, and I'd be really good at due diligence. And then in the second year, I'd see which ones are doing the best. The 2 that are doing the best, I take $125,000 into each of those. That deploys my $500,000. If you do it that way, you have a really good chance of making a really good return. If you take the $500,000 in the first 3 months, give $250,000 to 2 companies, probably going to lose it all.
Wow.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
And you write off the other 8 companies that you didn't invest in is they're probably not going to work out, but the 2 that you put the 125
well, it could
in,
be 3 or 4. I think I could be good enough to get 3 or 4 out of 10. We'll see if that happens with this fund. But definitely, because when you hit one, I mean, just to tell you things like Omniture was a 40x return for me, 40 times my money. So, and then 4Up, which was a golf software company here in Utah that was really successful. That was my biggest one of all time. My Boom Startup fund, sidecar fund, made 283 times its money in that company. I made personally 83 times my money. Actually blended between both of them for me personally is about 143 times my investment dollar that I put in. That's pretty amazing. And 4Up went past 5 years, and you got Section 1202 treatment, which is no tax on the first 10 million of gain. So pre-seed investing is a very good place to invest if you know what you're doing. Yeah.
I have one more question. Do you have anything, Carlos?
No.
I wish we had hours with you.
Plenty more questions, but we don't have time.
Well, thank you.
Somebody is sitting there listening to this podcast. They're sitting there listening to this podcast in the search stage. They're thinking about giving up or persevering. What advice do you have for them?
There's a time to abandon and give up, but Lean Startup will tell you that. It's when your job is to go into the brains of your target customers. If you're not getting the results you're doing, you have one of 2 things wrong. The wrong target customer or your product idea sucks. One of the 2. You can have a great product, but you're going after the wrong customer. Or vice versa, you have a terrible product, but the customer truly has a problem they need to be solved or a need to be filled. But you have to have both. You have to have a great, awesome product targeted to the right customer. That's what makes for a great idea in business, right? And so the person sitting there, if you're not progressing, something's broken and you need to fix yourself, fix your situation. It should not take any more than 3 to 5 months to have a go, no go on any company. That's my opinion. And if you're part-time at it, if you don't know what you're doing, you can go a year and a half. I mean, but it's super silly to do something for a year and a half and then realize, oh, it never would have worked. In Startup Ignition, our boot camp, we're trying to train you and others how when they hear an idea, they know very quickly, okay, is this an idea worthy of spending time doing the validation process? And then when they're in the middle of the validation process, they recognize the signals saying, this is not just something where we can pivot. This is something we need to abandon. And that happens a lot. You know that Twitter, for instance, started as a completely different business and they had burned half the money, but they were actually pretty honorable. And they went back to their investors and said, our idea is bad. It's not going to work. We have half the money less. We will return it to you. The investor said, actually, we like that you're that way. Keep that money. Do you have any other ideas? And they said, well, we have this crazy notion about 140 character communication system. Totally different business.
Here we are with X.
Yeah. So anyway, does that help answer the question? Make some sense?
That's amazing. This has been awesome.
I do have one more question, if that's okay. I will keep it short. I wrote down I've loved your energy ever since you walked through those doors. Just super energetic, smiling.
Naturally caffeinated. I told people.
I just love your energy, and I want to know what's your why? What's your what is your why as a person?
It's that goes back to my decision not to go to medical school. What really crystallized it was in my senior year, when I was saying, okay, I'm not going to medical school. What am I going to do? Chemistry major. I went and talked to the chemistry people. Oh, someday you might make $40,000 a year working for a chemical company. And I go, I don't want to do that either. And so then I said, and I rediscovered, actually, I like business. So I signed up for all the lecture series in the business school. And then I signed up for some 400 level finance classes that I was not qualified for, because in those days you could sign up and they didn't have computers checking. And so the first day I got caught and they were going to kick me out of the class, and I begged to stay in. They let me stay in. It was amazing. And I rediscovered a love for business and business things. And I just really enjoy business and entrepreneurship, the growing and building. I will be honest with you, it's the climb up the mountain that I like, not being at the summit. Actually, and that goes back, my first things I said in my boot camp out of my words is, we're going to talk a lot about money and creating wealth in this boot camp, but if that's your only goal, you'll never reach it. And also be careful what you wish for, because about half the people that I've helped become multimillionaires, it's destroyed their lives. So they lose their families, they lose their way. And so it's really important so it's actually the climbing up the mountain. The entrepreneurs are happiest when they're struggling and climbing up the mountain, not when they arrive at the summit. It's really an interesting phenomenon.
I love that. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks.
This was amazing.
Thanks, John. It's a wrap.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on all the good work you're doing.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.